Welcome to Podheria. Today's guest is Dr. Ajay Vinze, Dean of the Costello College of Business at George Mason University. Dean Vinze brings a wealth of experience from his extensive career in business education and has been a catalyst for transformative initiatives that bridge the gap between business education and real-world impact. From his pioneering work in creating dynamic learning environments to his deep commitment to fostering diversity and inclusion within the academic space, Dean Vinze is a true visionary, and I am so glad to share this conversation with you all. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Ajay Vinze. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode, and let's just dive right in. First question I wanted to ask you was, what were your early childhood and schooling years like, and in which ways did it sort of shape your career path?
Great way to start off, and thank you for having me. When you say early childhood schooling years, I'm originally, just to give you a little background, originally from India, but interestingly grew up in the Philippines for a good part. So when you say early childhood, are probably, certainly early parts are all in India. So very much influenced by India and the Indian context and the Indian setting and so on. But in high school, I ended up going to the Philippines. My father was transferred over there to the Philippines, working at the Asian Development Bank. So I was part of the international school setting over there. And I think that was incredibly influential for me. For one, that was the first time I traveled outside India and so on. And international schools are a unique group of schooling, so because of where they are and because of where Manila is in Southeast Asia, international schools become a part of the larger international school context in that area. So when you do intramural sports, for instance, you end up going from one country to the other just because they're so close together. You end up seeing a greater part of the world. Distances might not be as large. So in a couple-hour flight or an hour flight, you can go from one country to another and see a completely different setting. So that was very, very influential for me, because what that did was actually got me really interested in and connected to this notion of global setting or being a global citizen. And that's something I've carried all throughout my professional career. One of the big things that I'm always excited about is the fact that my career gave me the opportunity, if you will, to live and work and travel through over 70 countries now. So that's one of my bucket lists. I got to make it 100 before I get done here. But mainly, more than just traveling, what it does is it really changes your outlook to people, to context, to business settings. So when you say influential, I think that was a huge influence, and purely by chance or luck, that we happen to be in Manila and I happen to grow up. So Philippines feels like a second home to me, and I'm thrilled to be from India and certainly delighted to be connected with the Philippines and with Southeast Asia. And what it's also doing is now helping as I try to chart course for our Costello College of Business into the Asian segment. So we are actively looking to make a presence in East Asia and Southeast Asia and so on. And that background helps in an interesting way many years later.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think it gives you a lot more perspective to have an international schooling experience, and just solely being able to connect with people from so many different backgrounds. I feel like that's something that shapes people a lot more than they might initially think. Especially, I know even for myself, like growing up in Northern Virginia has been almost like just
That's
a
an
new
international experience by itself.
Exactly. It feels international, like just being here, with so many people coming into like the capital, people visiting all the time, and having such a diverse school setting. And even at George Mason, having one of the most diverse campuses across the nation, it's been an amazing experience. And I think it really is pivotal to shaping people and understanding others more, being able to communicate with others more, and just overall form better connections. So that's incredibly valuable. And I also feel like a lot of students in college these days will do their study abroad where they have that sort of international schooling experience if it's something that they were missing out on just staying on campus. But now, even being able to sort of expand beyond just the borders of your country, but connecting and even learning and educating yourself in another country has become such an awesome experience that people have the opportunity to actually go for. So that's great. And going back to your schooling, when you were like in high school and college and all that, were there some key influences or mentors that were like pivotal to kind of shaping you into who you are today?
Uh, uh, as in any high school setting or in any early years, biggest influencers are your teachers. You remember your teachers fondly. You remember your teachers as having shaped your thoughts and process of how you approach matters and so on. So, yeah, several teachers I can sort of. It's interesting. I'm getting at the back end of my career over here, but I remember my grade school teachers and my middle school teachers and high school teachers distinctly. And I think each one of them had an influence in so many different ways. So I think teachers would be one. Certainly, a big influence is at home also. Your parents and your siblings and so on are. I have two brothers and a sister. And each one of them have a different influence, and they're in different parts of the world and so on. So just watching them, since I'm the youngest of four, I get to see what all they did and what works, what didn't. So I think they influenced what I do and how I do it as well. But certainly I would put teachers as my biggest influencers in early career, and then some key mentors as I started off my professional career. I think be happy to share with you as we get along in this conversation. You don't sort of wake up to say, I want to be a professor, I want to be a dean or what have you. That's not the way it quite works. You have different aspirations and you sort of work or get into these roles in different ways. But the reason why you get into them is because someone influenced you early on in your career to think like that. And that shows up at some point in time as you go through your career. So yeah, many people, certainly teachers, home influence, and early career mentors. I think very thankful to all of them because they've been just wonderfully instrumental in helping me get to where I am.
That's amazing. And I especially would second on the teachers. I remember my second grade teacher was the best teacher I've ever had in my life and continue to remember her as such. And, siblings and parents, especially growing up around them, sort of the environment, everything has such a pivotal role in kind of changing you as a person and develop just who you are as a whole. So that's great. And, that kind of leads me into my next question about your transition specifically. I know you mentioned that, you don't just wake up and think that you're going to be a professor or a dean. So what did that transition look like? And sort of what were some things that kind of pushed you into becoming into this like role that you are in today?
Yeah, sure. And this is interesting because again, I had no initial inclinations or thoughts of getting into academia, so to speak. So I think the early experiences with my teachers were an influence in me deciding to take this route. So that shows the influence and impact of influence. But it is curious, you think about what works with you and what doesn't, and how do you how did I move from industry to academia? I was, certainly after my graduate work over here, and I'll date myself way back in the early 80s when I first finished my MBA and so on. Those were recession days over here in 1980. Those are the Carter presidency time. If you remember, you may not remember, but I remember. The prime rate was 16 and 17%, and there was recession, and it was just ridiculous. And there weren't as many job options over here in the U.S. So I did my graduate work over here in Connecticut, and decided, well, I'll go back home to Asia. to see if there are better options for me over there, since it was a tough job market over here in the U.S. So I was actually headed back to India and stopped in the Philippines on my way. Ended up getting a job there and worked there for 2.5, 3 years in the consulting business. And interestingly, my graduate work was my undergraduate is in accounting, my graduate work was in finance. So I was looking to be a financial consultant and so on. And here's the funny thing, right? So I look at myself now, lots of gray hair and so on. Well, that was the reverse problem I had at that time. I was young and didn't quite, I was all of, what was I? Good question. 22, 23 or whatever. And I was trying to get to be a financial consultant. And this consulting company effectively, they were trying to put me in these roles. And finally, the partner said something really strange to me. He said, "Well, Ajay, you can do these kind of things, but the problem is the client feels uncomfortable about sharing these detailed stuff with such a young person. So maybe you need to look for something else." I said, "What the heck does that mean?" And of course, as you may guess, that I was miffed about it, and I said, "Oh, that's not right," and all that kind of stuff. But again, when you say influencers, the partner said something very interesting to me, which effectively changed the career track that I was on. He said, and this was 1982, 82. And he said, you may want to look at this new area that seems to be coming up. There are computers and people are talking about it. And this is the pre-Microsoft era, right? So I said, okay, whatever, so they put me on their dime into a training program for information systems for 6 months. And by golly, I just loved it. I had never done anything like that before. I had no background on it. I just loved it and ended up doing IT consulting for 2 years after that. And luckily in IT consulting, young was actually a good thing because the older folks didn't know what the heck was going on. At least that was the perception. So there, the youth worked out. And long story short, because of that, I ended up doing my PhD in applied computer science, which is sort of going in reverse direction, going from a very non-technical business degree to a technical engineering kind of degree, applied engineering degree. So, which was, again, completely by accident or happenstance or whatever you call it. But sometimes you make the best laid plans, and life seems to have different plans for you. And so you go with the flow, and here I am. And you asked about how did I end up in academia versus industry. So after I finished my PhD was also in applied work. I did work with IBM and Endicott, actually. That's where it was. My dissertation was based out of some work at IBM and Endicott. And it was a very touch and go moment because I had offers from IBM as well as from several schools. And the question was, they choose this or that. And what really drew me towards academia is the freedom of thought, the freedom to allow you to conduct your research and sort of define for yourself what you feel are things you want to study and sort of the onus is on you. Very much like you said, you are interested in startups and so on. The onus is on you. You can do startup, but no one is going to say, you should do this. Or you do stuff, but you sort of are responsible for your, and that to me was really appealing. And so, at the very last moment, I chose to head out into academia. It was a really touch and go. You say 1 degree of separation. It could have gone either way in those last few days, but chose to be a faculty member, and I've never looked back. It's been a fantastic ride. Joined Texas A&M University as their faculty member on their information systems group, and then from there on, never looked back. I always had sort of 1 foot in practice, so all my research is very applied in terms of having practical implications or applications. I feel, I'm not a natural or physical sciences researcher, if you will. So really looking for, in business context, looking for applied research, research that has implications for practice or for policy or what have you, but really looking at the nexus of technology and business. So I ended up in academia, and here I am, 35 years later, still haven't let go.
That's amazing. And I think it's fascinating how you were able to find these intersections throughout your career path. So whether it be early on in your career, where even by chance you happen to fall into the world of like information systems and IT and all that, with intersecting with your background and accounting and finance and all that. So I think it's so validating and reassuring that even back then intersections were a thing, and being able to kind of navigate your own path and create your own path out of kind of all the background that you've had and gathered up so far. Um, I think that's amazing, and I'm glad that it continues to be sort of a theme even nowadays where technology has pretty much infiltrated every field of any sort. So being able to kind of take a technological background and then a non-tech background, being able to combine things and kind of just make the perfect mix of a career for yourself is now more possible than I think it's ever been. So that's really great to hear. Um, in terms of your role, how do you envision the future of business education just across the nation, at the school, but even beyond that, just in general?
And you're asking a dangerous question, because that's where I get into my soap box. But this is, this is an interesting time and an interesting setting. Education for the longest time was a fairly staid or stable kind of an environment, right? So I'll give you an example. Even if you look at the credit hours, you say I have 3 credit hour course. Where the heck does that come from? This notion. It's over a century old concept. It first came up with the Carnegie Foundation, where they had to sort of, in some ways, define what is a unit of education, right? So that's where it came. So if in 120 years we haven't changed that, then it sort of suggests to me something's ripe for change, because a lot has changed in the world since. But jokes aside, yeah, when you look at higher education, the way higher education is delivered and the way higher education is consumed have both changed in terms of expectations and aspirations. And also the financial model of higher education has changed. That is, at one time in public universities, the state or the public institution was supported, maybe 80, 90% of their financials were supported by the state. But today it's around the 20% mark and dropping, right? Therefore, what that changes is the equation of what students do and expect from universities, right? This notion of going into a school and really broadening your horizons still holds. That's important. But equally important is that you have to come out the other end functionally ready for a job, career ready, right? So yes, the whole idea of going to the university is it has to broaden your thinking abroad, but it has to be broaden your thinking and broaden your perspective with a purpose. And so how do you define that? And the financial part of it is, if you as a student have a significant outlay of financial means or contribution to the university through tuition and otherwise, then as a business person, I would say you should also look for return on investment. And return on investment can come in many forms. I'm not saying money is the only form of it, but money is certainly one metric for it, right? So when you look at that, the question becomes, how do I provide return on investment? So if you look at your Costello College of Business, for instance, our number one strategic priority is what? Career readiness and student experience. You should have a great experience while you're doing this, broadening your horizon. But just having a great experience in the college of your choosing is not enough. You need to have a job at the other end. And that is something I'm super proud about, what we have done in business schools and all the institutions that I've been associated. By golly, we place our students, and we place them very well. And they do very well in their career. So I think that is the metric, right? So now what is changing in academia? Well, you look at major points in time when things cause you to make a switch. And the most recent thing that has really jarred us into thinking differently is COVID. There's definitely a pre-COVID and a post-COVID. And it's changed the way we think, exist, educate, work, what have you. So education has to change because of that. And it's not just about face-to-face or online. That is one version of it. That is just a delivery mechanism, right? Whether you come face-to-face. What has really changed is the unit of education, in my mind. Again, take this for what it's worth. The unit of education has changed in that historically what you said was university was cleanly define your entire scope. Thou shalt do all these things, and then you shall get a degree, right? In many ways, in today's day and age, what has happened is there are many more avenues of getting that education. What causes it to be cohesive within a university is what we need to look at. So the notion of modularization of education is important. And the notion of allowing students and employers, both, to have the ability to craft your degree and your educational experience so you're career ready. So that is the mindset you want to get into if you are going to be an effective business school. And that's really how we are crafting ourselves over here. How do you modularize education? How do you make sure it's you can consume it? In many ways, think about it this way. It's like the Netflix version of education, right? So what do I mean by that? And not just mean that you can subscribe to it, but it's the notion of what a course means. Right. So what does it mean in the Netflix version? What is the inventory that Netflix has? Their inventory is all the movies or right? What is the inventory that universities have? Their courses. The question is how a course gets associated with a path, right? So I can potentially look at an accounting course or a finance course that can be valuable to a finance major, to an accounting major, to a marketing major, or to a healthcare person, or to someone in sports, or to someone in music like yourself, right? Or someone in public health. No, it could be wherever. The course hasn't changed. The context has changed, right? So can you now start assembling these courses into meaningful contexts and allowing students to take those contexts as building blocks for their education? And that's the way we are defining. In fact, I'm happy to say at George Mason, we are the leaders in this space in the country. We are, in fact, defining what this. Now, the issue always going to be, is the market ready for this kind of thinking? And that is where I think we are delivering this. What we are now also actively doing is to make sure to educate the market that this is. And where did this idea come from? It came partially from the students, but it also came from the people who are going to employ you all, right? So the last 2 years, I spent an inordinate amount of time, at least I think in 2 years, I've met over 120 business leaders over here, mainly asking them what? Asking them, hey, students are not my consumers. Students are my products. Business community or the economy at large is the person who's going to consume your services. So it's correct for me to ask them, what do you want in our students that make them career ready or appealing to you, right? And this is what I'm describing to you is a sort of conglomeration or putting together of all those ideas. But what we are doing as an educational institute, you have to operationalize this. How do you operationally? And that's what we have really done. I think that is in place now after I'm starting my third year here. In academic time frame, or academic mindset, this is lightning fast. In business thing, people say, oh, what the heck were you doing for 2 years? But in academia, because academia inherently, people complain about it, that it's slow. But that is where the strength of academia is also, right? It is thought through, thoughtful, rigorous, data-based, done by a set of folks, all PhDs, all highly educated, all with great interest in our students' well-being to see what. And there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of discussion, and that's what the outside world sometimes misconstrues as inaction. It actually is deliberation that comes up with the best solution. So I think we have sort of gone through that, or we are, and we'll continue to go through that, but really changing what I like to refer to as the arc of higher education. That's really what we are trying to do. But again, sorry, long-winded answer.
No, that was perfect. And I think what you mentioned about sort of the academic process of pretty much implementing any sort of change, um, having development, all of that, since academia itself is just so deep rooted. This is like it's I'm sure it's super difficult to really instill even like a small degree of change without it affecting pretty much everything that's connected to it or everything that it's tied to. So I
That's
think
right.
it's impressive. And especially I would say the idea of learning things, but in context to something that applies to yourself. So as an individual, being able to shape your academic career path into something that you can really take out of your college experience and take it out into the real world and say that I'm ready for something that, I've been ready, like had my all my years to prep for this, and I've taken the combination of this class and this idea and this learning experience in order to sort of form who I am today. I think that's super valuable. And I would say it's definitely one of the reasons that drew me to George Mason itself, because as someone
Good
who
choice.
no, I'm very glad, especially I think one of the best things is being able to study things that are at like very like two polar opposite fields, but still somehow having a connection amongst the two. Like as someone studying music and business, despite them being polar opposites in pretty much every way imaginable, I think I was able to again take something into a context that's bigger than just the class itself or the requirement itself or even the degree itself. I think nowadays education goes beyond just having a BS in this or a BA in this or a BM in something. So I think it's super valuable that this innovative step of thinking and doing has been implemented at a university that's already so well connected and just very like international in its thinking, very global in its thinking.
So
So
here's something, if I might add to, you said something interesting. You said you're looking at business and music as polar opposites or two ends of the spectrum. Um, I'll let you in on a secret. I mean, what this idea of modularization of education or doing comes from some of the early research I did on digital music. And it's this notion of willingness to pay. So if you remember in the music industry, you may or may not remember, but I certainly remember this when CDs were all the rage, right? So in a CD, what do? You have whatever 12 songs, and you're going to pay $14 for the 12 songs, but you're stuck with the 12 songs, right? But you actually like only two of them, right? So if say you were paying $14 for 12 songs, but you really like only two, now you've suddenly not paid 90 cents for a song, you actually paid $7 for a song, right? So the question is it worth $7? Or are you looking, education is something like that, right? If you look at a degree, if I have everything prepackaged for you and say, thou shalt take these 10 courses, well,
right.
Are you really paying for all of them, or are you where is the value coming? So what you're trying to do is you're increasing the value by and the reason why that's important is this notion of willingness to pay. And it's a business concept, right? Willingness to pay. Willingness to pay when? Willingness to pay in the presence of a zero priced option, right? So if you can get, like you said, you could get trained elsewhere, you could pick up, a free online course, this, that, you could. And those are cost almost nothing, right? And in many cases, actually cost nothing. But do you get credentialed by it? Does society respect what you, right? So that's really, so we have to think differently. And it's interesting here. So you're not as far away as you think. Those are very connected. The business of music.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you bring that up, especially since I feel like education um in these past like decades has just rapidly been changing. Like there's been new developments, there's new studies, there's things that are showing to be more valuable than others. Um, and especially when it comes to course load, I know so many people, so many students elsewhere that are attending different institutions, but I'm sure they would hit skip on a lot of their courses and just, rewind some of them, maybe go back to others. Some just really proving to be super crucial for something that they're pursuing a career in. So it's incredible to look at education in a wildly different context than what I feel like it's been looked at, and in the way that it's been looked at in the past. So that's super important. And, just pivoting into a different idea of just innovation and entrepreneurship. So, how do you encourage innovation amongst not only your students, but also faculty at the School of Business?
Yeah, you said two magical words, innovation and entrepreneurship, and they both are tied in a interesting way. So when you look at entrepreneurship, the way, at least I'll tell you how I look at it as the most raw form of business, right? An entrepreneur is everything from a janitor to CEO all at once, right? They're going to run the business, they come with the idea, keep the books, create the products or the service, the whole thing. And they're responsible for everything. What management is all about scaling up. Entrepreneurship is the raw form of business. And when you attach management to entrepreneurship, you're talking about scaling of the business. So entrepreneurship is a very unique aspect and very central to business schools. It has to be. The other part of this is innovation, and innovation is also very central to business schools, right? Why? Because when you look at innovation, people think of innovation as, you created this great new gadget or whatever new technology. That's not really necessarily the only way of, you can innovate on many different levels. So you can have technology innovations, you can have product service innovations, you can have process innovations, and these almost stack one on top of the other, right? Just getting a new technology won't do it. Based on that technology, you have to create new products and services. And based on those products and services, you create new processes. And based on those new processes, you change the business model, right? So it's a simple thing. We all carry our iPhone around, right? So when iPhone first came about, that's the technological innovation, right? The products and services that came out of it are completely different, and that has changed. And the new apps and the way of communicating and all those things, right? That changed the process by which we exist and interface. And that now has changed the fundamental of business model of delivery, right? So that's the stacking. So when you talk about innovation, you have to talk about innovation on all those scales. When I speak about innovation, innovation is inherently disruptive because when you innovate or you change, you're changing the status quo in some ways. That's why you're innovating, right? So you're disrupting some existing model. And when you disrupt some existing model, what it does is it causes something else to come in its place. But while that new model comes into place, you feel this tremendous sense of lack of control, if you will. And how do you manage yourself through that? And that's really so I think those two are connected in some ways. But again, remind me of your original question. I'm sorry, I digressed into some other land. But those are connected, and in a business school, they're both important to what you do. You have to be so faculty have to innovate because their research inherently is innovative, right? Because the whole idea of research is you're pushing the boundaries of knowledge in some ways. So they have to innovate over there, but then they have to also innovate on bringing that research into the classroom. So
Right.
there are two levels of innovation over there that are involved. So faculty always have to be innovative in terms of what they do and how they do it. And entrepreneurship again is going to manifest itself through, if you will, bouncing off of these different innovations. So they're all connected in some meaningful way.
That's very valuable insight. And are there any particular success stories or inspiring moments specifically throughout your tenure that's kind of been a highlight for you that have stood out more than the rest, maybe?
Well, there are lots, as I guess when you spend 35 years as there are many moments that stick in your mind as pivotal moments. I think when you let's sort of focus in on, say, on entrepreneurship, you said, right? So let's look at it from that perspective. So that's something that has always been of interest to me in a different way. So if I say entrepreneurship is the most raw form of business, then what's the context for that entrepreneurship becomes important. So when I was at Arizona State University, I was looking very closely at this notion of entrepreneurship for veterans. The veteran population, they come with unique skill sets and unique abilities. But how do you translate that into business ideas, or how do you help them translate them into business? So we focused on that when I was at ASU. When I moved to the University of Missouri as dean over there, I sort of focused attention of entrepreneurship. Again, we had the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship over there also, but you're really looking for how do you focus that into some meaningful thing. Over there, we focused on entrepreneurship for the neurodiverse. So people on the spectrum who have a very amazing ability to be entrepreneurial once you focus them into an idea. Well, when I came here to George Mason, one of the things we were looking at is what is meaningful in this context. And what we're looking for is something that you mentioned, the notion of our strength is diversity. Our strength is we are different in terms of how we approach things and so on. And our approach has to include a variety of folks and with different entrepreneurial mindsets. So we refer to as inclusive entrepreneurship and are looking at it from three different angles. And one is hugely successful. We have already had 1 year run on it, something called the RISE program, Refugee and Immigrant Success Through Entrepreneurship. And this is not for credit. It's not for, this is actually supported by external dollars, the funding that we get and so on. But we took on 46 different refugees, if you will. And I'm not getting the political side of it. It's just they've been given legitimate status in this country and they're here. I think it's a useful exercise of the business school's ability to convert them into meaningful economic assets for our society. And they're refugees because they were displaced from somewhere else, not because they don't have skill sets. Or they're just displaced and they come with different skills. Now, how do you provide them a mechanism or understanding of how do you do business here? So I can go into that at a later time with you in detail, but it's a 1 year program that we did, and it is spawning about 26 new businesses this year. And this is your business school in action. And these are refugees from all over the world. And businesses range from home childcare to food businesses to carpet import export to IT services. It's the full range. And it's amazing. It's amazing to watch that in action. It is one of the feel-good things that not only is your business school doing good in the classroom for our students, it's doing good, period.
Yeah. And I think that's such a, again, transformative way of, leading education. And I can't imagine the amount of companies who, if they're able to kind of apply this sort of mindset into their recruitment, into their talent search, into pretty much everything that they do when it comes to getting new employees and having new people trained, if they apply mindsets like this into their own companies respectively, about the tremendous growth that can result from that. And just really, it also helps, I think, not only these companies that at the end of the day are getting the advantage of having such well prepared students, but also the students themselves having that sort of background and experience. So that's incredible. And going off of that, how do you prepare your students for this crazy entrepreneurial landscape that we have currently in present day times, but then also just kind of future proofing them, making them ready for what's to come?
Sure. And I think that's the beauty of education, right? Most of the time, you're not preparing your students for just a job. You're preparing them for the future of, because the problem with the rate at which technology is changing and so on, and you have these various versions of the statistic, you'll hear about it, but 6 of 10 jobs that are going to be there in 5 years from now don't exist right now, right? So how the heck do you prepare students for a job that doesn't exist? How do I prepare you for that? So the only way you can prepare them for it is to make sure their fundamentals are strong. Plus, they have good communication skills. Clearly, you're a great example of that. And they have the ability to engage, right? Business is inherently what? Business inherently is a relationship between two parties where either goods or services are exchanged and value is felt on both sides. You person paying and the person receiving both feel value from that exchange. That's when business is sustainable. Otherwise, it's not really a sustainable business. So how do you do that? And if we can train our students into that, along with fundamentals of business, they don't change. Technology change, but if you keep your eyes on the prize from that perspective and stay true to the fundamentals, I think our students will be ready. And which is why I think I feel good about our students being ready. I know there's a great deal of uncertainty when students are just graduating and so on, what will the future be? It's tough times. That's the same thing every generation feels. It's no different. Certainly the speed at which technology is changing and so on is much quicker now. And so these are tough times, but you're far better equipped and far better positioned. So I have no concerns about that. But I think we need to stay true to both the reason for businesses and how you do it and the fundamentals of business. I think if you marry the two of them, then you're forever flexible, and then you bob and weave with where you go.
And I appreciate that last sort of insight of being flexible, because I think that's really the name of the game these days, when who knows what will happen in just a day or two from now about whatever field that anyone's working in or trying to pursue. So that flexibility aspect is super, super crucial, and definitely well sort of encouraged throughout the school. So that's really great to hear. Um, Now, shifting into a different area about just a little bit more about just you and your personal and like personal insights, but also philosophies. I wanted to ask, how do you manage balancing both your professional but then also personal responsibilities? And how have you sort of done this throughout your years in academia?
It depends on who you ask if they'll tell you whether I've done it or not. Well, it I think and you have to do this balancing act at every stage in your life, right? So it's not just at the back end or the front end. At every stage, as students, you're doing balancing all the time, right? You're balancing between different options. You, for instance, are doing your music business and you're doing this. So you're balancing. It's all about prioritization and time management and how you do this, and really staying true to your priorities and being so yes, career options are important. Professional growth and is absolutely important, because that's where you get a lot of your sort of presence and your self-worth, if you will. But what you can never let go is the notion of how important family is, right? So they keep you grounded, they keep you real. Yeah, I've been married for over 40 years now, and and this is my wife and I were high school classmates, so we've known each other forever. But it keeps you grounded. Your family keeps you grounded. Your children keep you grounded. And now increasingly, I say my students keep me grounded. So when you say, how do you balance these? Sure, you have tough days, and sure, you have days when you say, what the heck is going on? Why am I doing this, or what am I doing, kind of thing. We all ask those questions of ourselves, right? In my case, what I do is, because I live and work in an academic institution, I have this luxury. This is really what I do. I get out of my office and actually just hunt for any student who's out there and just randomly go talk to them for a few minutes, and or talk to 2 or 3 of them. And that gets your head screwed on straight real quickly, because what it tells you is this is why you're here. This is why. So I think this constant reminder of why you're here and what you're doing and why you're doing it is important, because sometimes in the heat of the moment you forget what is important. And I think if you just take a moment to step back and reorient yourself into why you're doing what you're doing, I think it keeps it's not terribly philosophical or whatever, but I think the nuts and bolts is you got to keep yourself grounded, and you got to sort of be clear about why and how you're doing things.
That's such great advice. And even as a student, even in the workforce, I know there are plenty of days where you kind of get worked up in the weeds of everything and how I find myself, especially for example, if it's like a organization I'm a part of, or if it's something I'm working on a project specifically with work, sometimes I think you get so tunnel visioned into
Mhm.
whatever it is that you're doing that you forget the broader context of everything. Whether it be like you mentioned, sort of the purpose, the reason why you might have started, or even just the reason behind your work in general. I think all of that definitely gets lost amongst all the chaos, but being able to take a step back and just really think about things at a greater context, but then also just not think, period. Sometimes I feel like
Yeah,
that's almost
that's
equally.
important as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that's very important to sort of emphasize it, especially in like early academic years when you're really trying to just have so much knowledge and obtain so much of knowledge while also having practical applications, while also doing this and that. So having so many different sort of duties and responsibilities, being able to step back and take that time is super valuable.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and
Uh, if I might, I
please.
marvel at students like you and our student athletes and people who do ROTC and what you're constantly juggling, right? You're constantly balancing. So you are already learning what the basic important pieces are of time management. How do you prioritize the importance of sort of making time count for yourself? And so, I think you guys are two steps ahead of I ever was.
That's that's very generous of you to say. And I do think that the best way to learn some of these things, and I wouldn't recommend this for maybe everyone, but just kind of throw yourself into whatever it is that you're passionate and interested about. I feel like that's definitely that's been my main method of exploring and learning, and I just kind of toss myself into the weeds of it and just hope for the best. And then
Sure.
while in that experience, I'm able to sort of take important things like takeaways from each experience and kind of see what works, what doesn't. It's very trial and error oriented, but I'm sure there's got to be better methods out there that don't necessarily have as much.
Go with what works.
Exactly. Um, just the last thing I wanted to ask you, thank you again for such an incredible conversation. It's been super valuable to have your insights, just your background, just learning a lot about who you are and how you've sort of become who you are. It has been just incredible. But my last question to you would be, what advice would you give to aspiring business leaders and educators?
Aspiring business leaders and educators. Wow, that's a big open-ended question. Yeah. Um, I think I would give similar advice to both of them. I think they are two sides of the same coin. And I think in many ways, for educators, I would say, educate with a purpose, because we have this tremendous responsibility, uh, because in many ways what you're doing is you're influencing the next generation of leaders, business and otherwise. So it's a huge responsibility if you think about it. It's not just about this one course that you're doing. As we started off in our conversation, the influence that you have as an educator or as a professor or a teacher or what have you is many folds what you think it is, because the way it's being consumed. Yeah. The other thing I would tell educators is, and this comes out of sort of being in this field for a few years now, is there's a lag effect of satisfaction that you get. You get the satisfaction when your students really succeed. Now, since I've been around for a little while in this, many of my students have ended up as presidents, partners, leaders, CEOs, what have you. Do I revel in their success? You bet. You revel in their experiences, in their successes, because you always look at them as you have made some difference. Or you may not have had the turning influence on that one, but you have had some contributing influence in that. And What is wonderful is 9 times out of 10 students will come back to you many years later. I still have students who, were my students 30 years ago, come back, and they've had a full career, very successful. But it's interesting, they come back and they revert back to student behavior. These are people who are very successful presidents and CEOs and so on. But when you're back in that, it's a very unique relationship between an educator and a student. And I think it's invaluable. It's just an amazing relationship. So that is something I think we should cherish and take very seriously, because it's a huge responsibility that we carry. For business people, what I would say is business is a natural extension of what we are over here in society. We are in a capitalist society. We live in a, so in many ways, businesses set the expectations for society in some ways. So the notion of being ethical business people, the notion of being business people with a purpose, notion of business people with serving society or having high value and so on is important. And I think their partnership with academia can only help both sides. So I think it's important. When I say there are two sides of the same coin, one is a producer, the other is a consumer. And I think the wonderful thing is we have these wonderful products we call students, who are who make us proud and who are going to make them excellent employees in the future. So that's the relationship you have. But I think both businesses and academia have great responsibility to society and to our students both. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, that's incredible advice. And I'm sure businesses, business leaders, educators, this has definitely been a challenging time to navigate in terms of, what is right, what is wrong. But, starting here, these are like the initial baby steps that people can take in the right direction. So again, very valuable. And thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Seriously, like had such a great time, just chatting, but also getting to learn a little bit about what it means to be in academia and sort of the role that you play, but then also the context in which your work has that effect on the students, the businesses, everyone around. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm so happy and proud that you're as successful as you are, and I wish you every success going forward.